There is one phrase that, when spoken in a moment of power, can strip you of all control. It sounds innocent. Sometimes it's even said with good intentions. But once it leaves your mouth, something changes. The person across from you no longer respects you the same way. Your influence begins to fade. And the worst part, most people don't even realize they're doing it. They think they're being honest or polite or even kind. But in a power dynamic, that one phrase makes you look weak, unsure, and easy to manipulate. Before I reveal what this phrase is and why it's so destructive, take a moment to write in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this message is reaching. And if this topic matters to you, if you want to understand how to maintain power, gain respect, and avoid the traps that ruin influence, hit the like button and subscribe right now. It helps more than you know. Robert Greene, the master of power psychology, explains that influence is not about being loud, aggressive, or constantly dominant. True influence comes from control. Control of your emotions, control of your words, control of how you're perceived. And the moment you lose that control, even just for a second, the entire structure can collapse. This is why what you say, especially in high-stakes situations, is everything. Words are not just sounds, they are signals. They reveal how you see yourself, how you see others, and how much power you actually hold. The phrase we're talking about is simple. You've probably heard it and maybe even said it dozens of times. But in a game of power, saying, "I think," is one of the fastest ways to lose your position. I think we should do this. I think he's not being honest. I think I'm right. Now ask yourself, what does "I think" really say to the other person? It says, "I'm not sure." It says, "I don't know." It says, "You're free to ignore what I'm about to say." And that's exactly what people do. They tune out, they move on, and you unknowingly fall lower in their mental hierarchy. It's not that thinking is wrong, of course not. But when you're in a power dynamic, what you think matters far less than how you frame what you say. Leaders don't say, "I think." They say, "Here's what's happening." They say, "This is the way forward." They say, "This is what we need to do." It's not arrogance, it's clarity, and clarity is power. Let's look at a real-world example. In 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, President John F. Kennedy was faced with one of the most dangerous moments in human history. The wrong word could have triggered nuclear war. He didn't sit at the table and say, "I think we should be careful." He said, "We will not allow nuclear weapons in Cuba." Firm, direct, no uncertainty. And because of that, he maintained control of the situation. If he had wavered even slightly, the results could have been catastrophic. On the opposite side, we have Neville Chamberlain in 1938. Facing Adolf Hitler, he chose to say things like, "I believe we have peace in our time." He was hopeful, polite, cautious, but ultimately he was dismissed and manipulated. The power dynamic slipped through his fingers. Because belief without strength means nothing in the hands of the powerful. So when you're in a meeting or a negotiation or even a conversation where influence matters, you have to speak with finality, not aggression, not arrogance, but authority. Authority doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't beg to be heard. It makes a statement and lets silence do the rest. Now, some people might say, "But what if I really don't know? What if I'm still figuring it out?" That's fine. Power isn't about pretending you know everything. It's about controlling how you express uncertainty. Instead of saying, "I think," say, "Let's examine this." Instead of saying, "I think this might work," say, "Here's an approach we should explore." You're not lying, you're framing. And in power dynamics, framing is everything. Imagine a doctor walks into your room and says, "I think you might need surgery." Do you feel confident? Or do you start to worry that this person has no idea what they're doing? Now imagine that same doctor says, "We've reviewed your results and surgery is the best course of action." Same message, Completely different effect. That's the power of presentation, and every word you say is part of that presentation. This applies in personal relationships too. When you say, "I think you don't respect me," what does the other person hear? They hear that you're unsure of your own feelings. They don't feel challenged. They feel invited to debate. And if they're manipulative, they will take that opening and twist it. But if you say, "It's clear to me that respect has been broken," everything changes. You're no longer requesting validation, you're setting a boundary. And power lives in boundaries. This is why Robert Greene's writing is so focused on removing the language of weakness. Because weakness is not always visible. It's not about posture or volume. It's about tone and the words you choose. Every time you say, "I think," you place doubt between you and your listener. You give them a reason not to follow you, not to trust you, not to see you as the leader in the room. What's dangerous is that "I think" becomes a habit. It creeps into your speech until you don't even hear it anymore. And once it's there, it becomes your default, even when you do have the right answer, even when you do know what needs to be done. That tiny phrase robs your confidence of its voice, and people can feel it. Because power isn't just about being right, it's about being believed. If you want to build unshakable influence, you must remove every trace of hesitation from your communication. That means cutting out qualifiers. Phrases like maybe, kind of, possibly, just, and of course, "I think." These are the softeners we use to sound polite. But in the power game, politeness without strength is weakness, and weakness invites pressure, always. One of the most common places this verbal weakness shows up is in the workplace. People want to contribute, but they're afraid of being wrong. So they preface every idea with "I think," just in case it gets rejected. But here's what happens. When you speak that way, people stop viewing you as a leader. You become just another voice in the background. And even when your ideas are strong, they don't stick because they're delivered in a soft and uncertain way. Think of the most influential people you've known. Were they always right? Probably not. But did they speak with confidence? Yes, that's what we remember. We don't follow the most accurate person in the room. We follow the one who sounds sure of themselves. That's human nature. People crave certainty. They are drawn to it. In moments of confusion or fear, they look for the person who can say, without hesitation, "This is the way." Now let's be clear. There's a big difference between confidence and arrogance. Confidence is calm. Arrogance is loud. Confidence doesn't need to prove itself. It simply is, and it shows in the words you choose. A confident person doesn't say, "I think this could be a solution." They say, "Here's the solution I'm proposing," and then they wait. They don't rush to explain or justify. They let the silence carry their certainty. Here's an example from history that illustrates this beautifully. During World War II, Winston Churchill was known for his powerful, unwavering speeches. He didn't say, "I think we can survive." He said, "We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight in the streets, we shall never surrender." No hesitation. No, "I think." And even when the situation was dire, his words gave people strength, not because they were magical, but because they carried authority. Compare that to someone who constantly speaks in a tentative tone. You've seen it. Maybe at a family dinner, or in a meeting. The person who always says, "Well, I think maybe we should." They get interrupted, talked over, ignored. Not because their ideas are bad, but because their words signal submission. And in the power game, submission is not rewarded, it's exploited. Even in everyday life, you can see how this works. Imagine you're in a restaurant and the waiter says, "I think the chicken is good today." Now imagine a different waiter who says, "The chicken is excellent today, you'll love it." Who are you more likely to trust? Who are you more likely to take seriously? The second one, of course. Because confidence creates belief, and belief creates influence. That's why the phrase "I think" is so dangerous. It feels small, but it sends a loud message. It tells the world, I'm not certain. And that little bit of doubt is all it takes to weaken your impact. Power is built on clarity, and clarity cannot exist where there is self-doubt. So what can you do instead? You start by being mindful. Catch yourself in conversation. Listen to your own language. When you hear yourself saying, I think, pause. Ask yourself, can I say this in a stronger way? Can I remove the uncertainty and still be truthful? The answer is almost always yes. It's just a matter of practice. Instead of saying, I think this project will work, say, this project is built to succeed. Instead of saying, I think he's lying, say, his story doesn't add up. You're still expressing your thoughts, but now you're doing it with conviction, and people respond to conviction. They remember it. They respect it. If you're in a position of leadership, whether in a job, a family, or a community, this shift in language is essential because people take their cues from you. If you sound unsure, they feel unsure. But if you sound steady, they feel safe. And safety builds loyalty. In negotiations, the same rule applies. The moment you say, I think, you give the other person an opening. A skilled negotiator will hear that and say, so you're not sure? They'll push you, test you, and try to shift the balance of power. But when you speak with clarity, when you say, this is the offer we're standing by, you create a wall that's much harder to push through. This doesn't mean you become rigid or closed-minded. Power isn't about never changing. Your mind, it's about choosing how you change it. If new information comes in, you don't say, I think I might have been wrong. You say, given this new data, we're taking a better path. One version sounds like doubt. The other sounds like leadership. And leadership is what people follow. Now here's something important. Changing your language doesn't mean changing who you are. You're not becoming fake. You're becoming intentional. Every word you speak sends a message. And when you're in any kind of power dynamic, you need to send the right one. Not with force, not with arrogance, but with the kind of steady certainty that makes people listen, even when you speak softly. So start today. Notice your words. Catch yourself before you say, I think. Replace it with strength. Replace it with clarity, and watch how people begin to treat you differently. Watch how they listen longer, push back less, and respond with more respect. Power is not about dominating others. It's about knowing how to hold your ground, quietly, clearly, and without apology. And it begins with the words you use every single day. One of the biggest misconceptions people have is thinking that power belongs only to the loud, the aggressive, or the naturally charismatic. But in truth, the most influential people are often the ones who say the least, and when they do speak, they use precise, confident language that leaves no room for doubt. This is not about dominating conversations. It's about eliminating anything that weakens your voice. That's why removing I think is such a small but powerful change, because what it really removes is the signal of hesitation. And hesitation, when detected, tells the other person that they might know more than you, or that you are unsure of your position. Even when you are actually correct, that tiny crack in delivery is all it takes for someone else to question your authority. Robert Greene teaches us that in any game of power, appearances matter as much as facts. If you appear uncertain, even when you aren't, you lose leverage. Power isn't just about truth, it's about perception. The right words shape that perception. The wrong ones destroy it. Think of power like a bridge. Every word you speak is either strengthening the foundation or slowly loosening the bolts. And I think is one of those words that weakens the structure. If you say it enough times, your credibility starts to collapse, and eventually you're just another voice people nod to but never follow. Now imagine a different way of speaking, one where your statements carry weight, one where people stop and listen, not because you raised your voice, but because your tone left no room for argument. This isn't something reserved for presidents or CEOs. It's available to anyone who trains themselves to speak with precision and certainty. Let's take another real-world example. Oprah Winfrey, one of the most influential media figures of all time, built her empire not by shouting over others, but by owning her voice. She didn't say, "I think this book is important." She said, "This is a book that everyone should read." And people listened, not because she demanded it, but because she believed it and said it with conviction. The people who lead don't hedge. They don't water down their opinions. They make bold, clear statements, and they take responsibility for them. That's what gives them presence. That's what gives them power. And this applies in personal conversations just as much as public ones. If you're trying to resolve a conflict, saying, "I think you don't understand me," feels passive. It gives the other person room to dismiss what you feel. But saying, "You don't understand what I'm trying to say," puts your perspective front and center. It may spark more resistance at first, but in the long run, it creates more respect because people know exactly where you stand. Now, this doesn't mean that every statement you make has to sound like a final judgment. It simply means that you must stop handing your power away through weak language. There's a way to be respectful and still command authority. You do it by speaking with clarity, cutting out unnecessary fillers, and believing in your own voice before anyone else does. Many people use "I think" as a shield. They believe it makes them sound humble, careful, or thoughtful. But in reality, it just makes them sound unsure. And no one follows uncertainty, not in leadership, not in business, and not in personal relationships. If you want to change how people treat you, you have to change how you speak to them. And it starts by removing every word that invites people to question your confidence. Let's explore another powerful shift. Instead of saying, "I think we should try this idea," say, "This idea will move us forward." You're not forcing agreement, you're framing progress. That subtle difference turns you from a participant into a guide, and that's what influence really is, guiding others without needing to overpower them. Confidence in speech doesn't come from volume. It comes from clarity. It comes from choosing your words carefully and trusting that they matter, because they do. Every sentence you say is either building your influence or tearing it down. There is no neutral ground in the power game. Robert Greene talks about the law of presence. Those who carry themselves with confidence naturally attract more power, and language is a central part of that presence. When you speak, your words create a feeling in the room. If your words are clear, decisive, and grounded, people trust you even before they fully understand your point. But if your words are soft, hesitant, or filled with qualifiers, people instinctively pull away. This is why mastering your language is so important. It's not just about being persuasive. It's about creating a gravitational pull. The right words draw people in. The wrong words push them away. In situations where power is shared, like partnerships, teams, or relationships, how you speak affects how others position themselves around you. If you constantly say, "I think," you're silently telling the other person that they can lead the way, that you're not quite ready to take the wheel. And most of the time, they will. Not out of malice, but because you gave them the space. So if you want to lead, you must take that space. And you take it with language, not aggressive, dominating language, but firm, clear, and confident statements. That's how leadership begins. That's how respect is earned, and that's how influence becomes permanent. This also applies when you're giving feedback. Let's say someone made a mistake and you want to point it out. Saying, "I think you could have done this differently," sounds soft and easy to dismiss. Saying, "This should have been handled differently," carries weight. It tells the other person that you've noticed a gap and that you're not afraid to name it. Again, the goal isn't to be rude. The goal is to be clear. Clarity is power. When people know where you stand, they adjust. When they don't, they guess. And guessing often leads to confusion, conflict, and lost influence. That's why every conversation you have is an opportunity to either build or lose your power. Every word you choose matters, and the people who succeed at the highest levels understand this better than anyone. You don't need to memorize scripts. You don't need to act like someone you're not. You just need to remove the phrases that signal weakness, and "I think" is one of the biggest. Once you begin removing "I think" from your daily language, something shifts internally. You begin to trust your own voice more. You realize that you don't need to soften your truth just to be accepted. You see that the respect you want from others begins with the respect you show yourself when you speak, and that shift over time transforms how others see you. But here's something most people don't understand. This isn't about being aggressive or controlling. It's about presence. Presence is the silent force behind all power. It's what makes someone walk into a room and command attention without saying a word. And when they do speak, they speak with certainty. Their sentences land, they don't ramble, they don't hedge, and they certainly don't say, "I think." Presence comes from alignment. It comes from knowing what you believe, knowing what you want to say, and having the courage to say it clearly. When your words match your beliefs and your tone matches your intent, people feel it. That's when influence becomes natural. You don't have to push it. It pulls people in on its own. Now let's talk about silence. Silence is one of the most powerful tools in any power game. And when you eliminate "I think," you begin to use silence more effectively. Most people are uncomfortable with silence, so they fill it with noise, soft words, nervous laughter, empty phrases. But the powerful know how to hold silence. They let their words hang. They give their sentences room to echo. When you remove "I think," you also reduce the need to explain yourself unnecessarily. Weak speakers feel the urge to over-explain. Strong speakers don't. They trust their words to stand on their own. That doesn't mean they never elaborate. It means they choose when and how to elaborate on their own terms. This is especially important when handling confrontation or disagreement. Most people retreat into soft language when challenged. They say things like, "Well, I think we're just misunderstanding each other," or "I think you're taking this the wrong way." These phrases may sound polite, but they give away your ground. They say, "I'm not sure where I stand, so please don't get upset." But strong communicators respond differently. They say, "Let's clarify what happened," or "Here's where the misunderstanding lies." They don't hide behind soft language. They guide the conversation with clarity, and that's how they stay in control, even when emotions rise. Think of someone like Nelson Mandela. Even after decades in prison, when he spoke with power. He didn't say, "I think reconciliation is important." He said, "Reconciliation is the only path forward." That level of clarity changed a nation, not because it was loud, but because it was grounded in truth, strength, and purpose. You don't need to be a world leader to speak this way. You just need to be intentional. Whether you're talking to your partner, your child, your boss, or a friend, your words either reflect your strength or your uncertainty. And most of the time, it's not the message that matters. It's how it's delivered. Even in writing, this rule applies. You've probably read emails filled with "I think," "I feel like," "maybe," and just checking in. These messages rarely leave an impression. They sound like someone asking for permission to exist. But the emails you remember, the ones that get action, are the ones that say, "This needs to happen," or "I'm following up on this deadline." Clear, direct, respectful, but never weak. If you lead a team, pay attention to how people speak in meetings. The ones who say, "I think," often struggle to gain traction. Their ideas float, but never land. But the ones who say, "Here's what we should do," get results. Not because they're smarter, but because they sound ready to lead. This is something you can practice every day. Start small. The next time you're about to say, "I think," pause. Ask yourself, what would this sound like if I removed the doubt? Say it out loud. Feel the difference in your own body. You'll notice your posture changes, your breath slows, you feel more grounded. That's the power of language. It doesn't just influence others. It influences you. The words you speak become the thoughts you believe. And if you keep saying, I think, you'll keep feeling uncertain, even when you know the truth. But if you begin to speak with clarity, you'll begin to feel more confident. And that confidence will reflect back through every interaction you have. Let's go even deeper. There's a psychological reason why I think weakens influence. When you say it, you trigger what's called a permission frame. You're subconsciously asking the listener to validate your opinion, and in doing so, you place them in a position of power over you. It's like holding out your idea and saying, "Do you accept this?" The moment you do that, you shift the power dynamic, and once it's shifted, it's very hard to get back. But when you remove "I think," you flip that frame. You become the one setting the tone. You stop asking for permission. You start leading the direction of the conversation. And the amazing thing is, people feel safer when someone else takes that lead. Most people don't want to make the hard decisions. They want someone to confidently say, "This is the path." That's the role you step into when you speak with authority. You become the person others rely on. And over time, that reliability turns into trust. And trust, combined with clarity, creates influence that lasts. Now, someone might argue, "But I don't want to come across as arrogant." That's a valid concern. But let's be honest, clarity is not arrogance. Arrogance says, "I'm right and you're wrong." Clarity says, "This is what I know, let's talk about it." One pushes people away, the other invites understanding. So don't confuse the two. You can be firm and kind, clear and compassionate, direct and warm. These things are not opposites. In fact, they work best when they live together. The key is not to hide your strength, it's to use it responsibly, and that begins with what you say and what you refuse to say. So let this be your new rule. Never say, "I think," when you mean "I know." Never weaken your voice just to be polite. Never hide your certainty out of fear that someone might disagree. Because in the power game, every word is a move, and the smartest players speak with intention. As your awareness grows, you'll begin to notice how often people around you use weak language. Once your ear is tuned, it becomes impossible to miss. In casual conversations, in corporate meetings, even in public speeches, you'll hear "I," "you think," "maybe," "I feel like," "just," and other phrases that quietly chip away at credibility. And when you hear them, you'll notice something else, how quickly those speakers lose control of the moment. But you don't have to follow that pattern. You can set a new standard for yourself, one built on presence, clarity, and respect. And when you speak that way, others adjust. People rise to the level of the person who speaks with certainty. Now let's explore another way this shows up when people are trying to be liked. This is one of the biggest traps in the power game. People soften their language because they fear rejection. They use "I think" to sound less threatening, to appear friendly. But what they don't realize is that true respect is never born from weakness. You might get someone to smile at you. You might avoid conflict, but you will never earn deep respect by diluting your words. Respect comes from clarity, from being rooted in what you believe, from having the courage to express it without apology. That doesn't mean being rude or confrontational. It means removing the nervous energy from your voice and replacing it with quiet strength. Let's say you're in a discussion about values or decisions, and you feel pressure to agree with others just to keep the peace. Most people would say, "Well, I think I agree, but maybe we should also consider..." That's a trap. It's a sentence wrapped in compromise. But someone with power would say, "That's one way to see it. Here's how I see it. The difference is subtle but powerful. One version bends, the other stands. You may feel resistance at first. Speaking clearly, without softeners, will feel uncomfortable. That's natural. We've all been trained to stay safe through language. But the truth is, growth always starts with discomfort. You'll notice some people may react negatively when you stop using weak phrases. They may say you sound too direct or too certain. That's because they're used to hearing indecision, and your strength challenges their comfort. But don't let that stop you. The moment you begin speaking with clarity, you stop blending in. You start leading, and yes, that may attract criticism, but it also attracts influence, loyalty, and real power. Look at some of the world's most effective communicators. They aren't the ones who ramble or hedge. They are the ones who deliver one sentence and let it land like a stone in still water. That sentence doesn't ask for agreement. It invites respect. There's also another layer to this, how your language affects your emotions. When you say, "I think," your body feels it, your breath shortens, your voice wavers, your mind questions itself. But when you speak directly, your body aligns, your tone steadies, your posture lifts, confidence grows inside you because your language is no longer betraying you. Every time you speak clearly, you reinforce your identity as someone who deserves to be heard. And over time, others begin to see you that way too. Your words become your reputation, your tone becomes your presence, and your clarity becomes your influence. Let's imagine you're mentoring someone younger, maybe a grandchild, a new employee, or a friend going through a tough time. If they ask for advice and you say, "I think you should consider," it leaves room for doubt. But if you say, "Here's what I recommend," or "This is what works," the message becomes a lifeline. Not because you're forcing them to obey, but because your words carry belief, and belief is contagious. Now, some people worry that this level of clarity will make them seem cold, but it's actually the opposite. When you speak clearly, people feel safer around you. They know where you stand. They don't have to guess your meaning or wonder what you really think. That predictability builds trust. And trust is the true foundation of power. Power, after all, is not domination. It's the ability to move people through presence, through clarity, through certainty. And those things begin with language. When you change your language, you change how people respond to you. And when you change that, you change everything. This is why Robert Greene's teachings are so focused on communication, because the real battle for influence isn't physical, it's psychological. And in every psychological battle, your words are your first weapon or your first weakness. If you walk into a room and say, "I think we need to fix this issue," you might be heard. But if you say, "This issue must be fixed," people sit up. They listen. Because you sound like someone who knows what they're doing. And in this world, that's rare. People are drawn to confidence, not because it's loud, but because it's clear. Let's take a quick look at the language of the world's top performers. Athletes don't say, "I think I can win." They say, "I'm going to win." Military leaders don't say, "I think this might work." They say, "Execute the plan." Surgeons don't say, "I think this is the right procedure." They say, "We're proceeding with this approach." Clarity saves lives, clarity creates results, and clarity builds power. You might not be in a battlefield or an operating room, but in your daily life, your words still shape the outcome. If you speak with strength, you'll be heard. If you hedge with doubt, you'll be ignored. So how do you begin? First, listen to yourself. Record a conversation. Watch how often you say, "I think." Count it. Then try again. This time, remove it. Replace it with clear, direct language. You'll be amazed at how quickly people begin to treat you differently. Then watch others. Listen to speakers, leaders, and public figures. See who uses soft language and who commands with confidence. Study the difference. Model the language of those who lead. Make their habits your own. Finally, be patient with yourself. This is a skill, and like any skill, it takes time to master. But every sentence you say with strength is a step forward. And over time, those steps build a foundation. One strong, enough to carry influence wherever you go. Now let's take this one step deeper and talk about internal authority. Because what really matters isn't just how others hear you, it's how you hear yourself. Most people who say, "I think," don't realize that the phrase is really about permission. It's a habit of asking the world, "Is it okay if I say this?" And once you understand that, you begin to see how much power you've been giving away every single day. Internal authority means you trust your own thoughts enough to own them. You don't wait for approval. You don't try to soften your truth so it lands more gently. You decide, "This is what I believe, and this is how I will express it." And that belief shapes every room you enter, every conversation you have, and every relationship you build. Let's look at what happens when you shift into that mindset. When someone challenges your opinion, you no longer feel the need to retreat. You don't say, "Well, I think you might be right." You say, "That's a different point of view. Here's mine." It's respectful, it's confident. It doesn't invite a power struggle. It closes the gap between disagreement and dialogue. This shift also improves your emotional control. When you trust your voice, you stop being reactive. You stop feeling the need to defend every sentence or justify every decision. You speak your truth and let the silence carry the weight. That calm confidence is rare, and it's magnetic. Now, consider how this shows up in leadership. Weak leaders talk in circles. They use "I think" to hide behind uncertainty, and their teams sense it. People under weak leadership feel nervous, unsteady, unsure of where they're headed. But strong leaders speak with direction. They say, "This is where we're going." Even if the path is difficult, their clarity gives people something solid to stand on. This is one of the most powerful lessons Robert Greene shares. Power is not about overpowering others. It's about being so centered that others naturally align with you. And language is the path to that center. Let's turn to a powerful analogy. Imagine you're a captain of a ship. If you're constantly saying, "I think we should head west," your crew starts to doubt the map. But if you say, "We're setting course to the west," they feel direction, even if the sea is rough. You're not promising perfection, you're promising certainty, and certainty moves people. Now here's something practical. Practice giving short, decisive answers. When someone asks your opinion, respond with one sentence, clear, direct, and without "I think." Say, "That's the best way forward," or "That's not the right move," or "This works, that doesn't." At first, it might feel blunt, but you'll see how quickly people begin to respond with more respect, not less. You may notice your conversations get shorter. You'll spend less time explaining yourself. People will ask fewer follow-up questions, not because they're disinterested, but because your words answered the question fully. When you're clear, people don't need to search for meaning. They get it. Let's take this into a more personal example. Imagine someone you love is making a big mistake. Most people would say, "I think this might not be the best idea." But what if you said, "This is dangerous, and here's why"? You don't leave space for confusion. You speak with care, but also with certainty, and that certainty shows love, not control. When you speak like this, people begin to rely on you, not just for advice, but for direction. You become the person they turn to when they feel lost, not because you always have the answer, but because you always speak like someone who does. That's the power of voice. We've talked about removing "I think," but let's also touch on the other softeners that destroy influence. Words like "just," "kind of," "a little," and "maybe." These are all shields. People use them to protect themselves from rejection or judgment, but all they do is weaken the message. If you say, "I just wanted to ask," it sounds like an apology. But if you say, "I have a question," it sounds like a professional. This applies everywhere. Emails, meetings, family dinners, even text messages. Every time you soften your voice, you train yourself to feel smaller. And every time you speak clearly, you train yourself to feel stronger. So here's the challenge. For the next 7 days, remove all softeners from your speech. No, I think, no, just, no, maybe. Speak as if you believe your words matter, because they do. Write it on a note if you have to. Keep it in front of you. Catch yourself in the moment. And every time you replace a weak phrase with a strong one, you reinforce your identity as a person of clarity. This might sound like a small change, but the impact is massive, because when your language changes, your decisions get stronger, your presence grows, your relationships deepen, and your reputation begins to shift. People start to say, there's something different about you. And what they're really noticing is that your words have started to carry weight. Let's go one step further. When you speak clearly, you also begin to attract different people. People who respect clarity, people who are decisive, people who value strength. Weak language attracts those who want to dominate or manipulate. Strong language attracts those who want to grow with you. This shift in who surrounds you will change your life more than you can imagine. And don't be surprised when some people fall away. When you stop speaking like someone who needs approval, people who used to enjoy your uncertainty may feel threatened. Let them go. Your life is not meant to be filled with people who only like you when you're unsure of yourself. It's meant to be filled with people who respect you because you respect yourself. Every word you say is a declaration, a reflection of what you believe, a message to the world about how you expect to be treated. And the world responds in kind. You've seen it happen before. A person who once felt invisible suddenly begins speaking with certainty, and everything changes. People who used to talk over them now pause to listen. Their opinions, once ignored, are suddenly requested. They haven't changed who they are, only how they speak. And that changes everything. Because power doesn't come from volume. It comes from presence. And presence begins with precision. When your words are sharp, clear, and intentional, people respond without even knowing why. They sense stability, they sense confidence, and they lean in. There's another layer here, how language connects to boundaries. People who use weak language often struggle to set boundaries. They say, I think this is bothering me, or maybe we should take a break, when what they mean is, this isn't acceptable, or I need space. The more you use I think, the harder it becomes to draw the line clearly. But boundaries are where your power becomes real. They define what you tolerate, how you're treated, and what you'll walk away from. And when you can express them clearly, without apology, you gain the kind of power that lasts, not because you're controlling others, but because you're protecting your peace. Think of the people you admire most. Chances are they speak with conviction. They're not loud, they're not pushy, but when they speak, their words cut through the noise. That's not magic. That's discipline. That's the result of choosing every word with care and refusing to give away their power through weak phrases.